Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is the Faraday Battery Challenges webinar series. This is the first one, and it's on growing a UK battery business across all sectors. I'm Jackie Murray. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. And I'm the Deputy Director of the Faraday Battery Challenge, and I'm your host for today. So we're live streaming today, which is rather exciting. To YouTube, so you and your colleagues can watch this back. I was already explaining to Nick that I don't intend to, but you guys are free to. And after today's, you'll get an email with a link and any presentation materials that we've used. So it's really today is going to be a discussion. Nick and I are going to be chatting. Nick's from the Denchi Group, and I'll introduce him in a moment. But after about 30 minutes, we're going to open it up to a discussion. So please, please use the chat function in YouTube. We're really keen to hear from you. I think there's lots of people from lots of different sectors who have joined us today. So that will be really good to get those sorts of questions. And we know there's going to be a wide range. So please feel free to ask us what you want to know. So if I so afterwards, we've also set it up so that you can meet us, and that's going not to be live streamed. But there's in the emails that you've had when you registered, there's a way to make an appointment with either Nick or myself, and that way you can get to pick our brains a bit more, talk a little bit about what you're looking for, or just make those contacts with us as you see fit. We'll post a link actually as well at the end of the session that will allow others to register. And I think if you've got any questions, I should bring your attention to the fantastic Natasha Sims in KTN. She's behind me at the moment, making sure that I give you all the information you need, but she will contact you. You can contact her rather if you've got any questions on any of that as we go along. Right, so I think Natasha's going to quickly flip the slides for me, and I'm going to introduce the Faraday Battery Challenge. So some of you will know about it, some of you won't. It's the government's, so the UK government's programme to get the UK to be a real force in battery manufacturing. And it consists of 3 pillars that add up to £274 million. I've been working on it for the last 3 years, and it's been a very fast-paced, exciting place to be. And I think that very much reflects this technology area, this innovation space. And the way we've sort of set it up is we've invested into a virtual institution, which is actually a very small number of people that brings together 400 researchers in the UK who are fantastic at doing research into batteries and battery manufacturing. And it's called the Faraday Institution. We have 88 million in collaborative R&D. For those that know Innovate UK, that's been 64 projects that are underway at the moment that are really working collaboratively in industry and RTOs and different organisations, really creating new solutions and prototypes for us. And then all of that adds up into this ecosystem. And I'm an ex-steelworker originally, and I know when you try and make something at speed, at rate, however much you've trialed it and however ready you think you are, it does have a tendency to go wrong. And it's in this space, the £108 million UK Battery Industrialisation Centre, that you get to put it right. And you get to put that right with some really specialist engineers. You can train your staff, you can set up equipment, you can actually really work through the nuances in a fully flexible, open access scale-up centre. So that comes online later this year, which is just a fantastic point. So I think what we're going to jump to now is the Mentimeter results. So I'm kind of hoping there's an audience out there. So I'm going to wait for Natasha to pull that up. So I'm going to have to scroll in a moment so I can actually read it. So that's really interesting. So we've got a few answering the Mentimeter. Do keep filling it in because it's really useful for us to actually know where your background is. Aerospace, automotive, energy storage, all very, very key areas for us as we move forward. And actually, the other is also really interesting. I suspect there's 1 or 2 perhaps investors in the room and others really interested to hear what Nick's about to say. So the second question really was, what types of investment has your business used in the past? And again, this is really helping us to find out where we can support companies like Nick's to move forward. Innovate UK is obviously key. I'm glad to see those. And other and none is really interesting. So if you're online and you fancy filling that in, that gives us great help to sort of understand the future. So I think now I should really move to the point where I introduce Nick Russell. I met Nick about 3 years ago up in Thurso in his office at Denchi Group. He's chairman and MD, and it's a UK-based engineering and manufacturing business, and it specialises in high reliability battery systems. But his background is really in Airbus defence and space with ABSL space products. So it's good to know that's where he comes from. ABSL was subsequently acquired by Enesis, where Nick spent quite a few years overseeing their European lithium-ion business. And he joined Denchi in July 2014. And I think what's interesting is some of the work that he's been doing. He's separately acquired Prima Electronic Services in August 2018 as part of his mission to build this UK manufacturing and engineering industrial group. And he's aligned that with the Mittelstand principles, and he'll sort of explain a bit more, I think, now. So Nick, nice to talk to you. Thanks for joining me.
Hi Jackie, yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, so I guess for the people listening in, tell me a little bit about Denchi Group. If you want to introduce it to those listening in, and let's find out what's been fundamental to your growth over the last 3 years since we first met.
Sure. So Denchi Group has existed in its current form since 2014. And at that time, the kind of core business was batteries and chargers for what we call the dismounted soldier. So that's any electronic portable product that a soldier might carry. So predominantly radios, but also night vision goggles and other similar bits of equipment. So at that time, it was maybe 35, 36 people, sort of 4.5 million turnover business. And I got involved with Derek Campbell, who's the FD up there, and between us, we developed a strategy to grow the business, because at that scale, a business isn't sustainable. You only need one significant customer to disappear, and it's game over. So we put together a growth strategy, which was driven by diversification, and there were 3 main elements of that. So military vehicles. So we looked at replacing lead acid batteries on military vehicles. So these are the starter lights ignition batteries, and typically we were able to replace 2 times 40 kilogram lead acid batteries with a 25 kilogram lithium-ion battery. So huge weight savings for an armoured vehicle. And over the past sort of 15 years, weight has become really critical in vehicles, because so much additional armour has been added to deal with the IED threat. So that's one avenue of growth. And where we are at the moment with that is that we've probably sold those batteries to 5 or 6 different customers. The business development cycle for defence works quite slowly. So they are out there in the field being tested, being qualified. And over time, there'll be an increase in sales from those particular customers as they get adopted across their vehicle fleet. The second element of growth is around sort of large-scale energy storage. So back in 2014, 2015, when we were building our strategy, we knew that one element of it was going to be large batteries, and we're looking at a few different markets. So we're looking at rail, we're looking at marine, we're looking at energy storage. And the common factor was we need to build batteries a lot bigger than the batteries that we build at the moment. So thanks to Innovate UK, we found some funding and some partners and developed a large battery architecture. And during the course of that 2-year program, we started to understand those markets a little bit better. And we're focused in on that commercial and industrial, behind the meter, 100 kilowatt hour to 2 megawatt hour size battery. So we were supposed to do our first commercial installation in March this year, but COVID kicked that into touch, and that's now going to be happening in August. So that's going to be a 100 kilowatt hour unit, and we've got a pipeline of opportunities to deploy in 2021. And the third element of growth is what we call our kind of industrial OEM market. So over the course of that journey, we've been approached by sort of various OEMs that have challenges with their existing battery supply, and this has always been offshore, Far East manufacturing. So there was a particular customer who is a manufacturer of stair lifts. They were having technical issues, quality issues with their product. There was a high cost for them of this because it meant an engineer had to go out and service the battery. So we were able to get quite close to their engineering team, really understand what they required from the battery, and offer a new solution that was actually more expensive than the product they bought from the Far East. But because of the reduced quality cost from a total cost of ownership perspective, our battery ended up being cheaper. So we're at about 10 million sales this year. So we've doubled in the past 5 years, which is fairly slow growth. 4 or 5 million to 10 million over 5 years. It doesn't sound fantastic, but what we've done over that time is really invest in a platform for growth. So we've really invested in our engineering team, equipment, facility to build a strong platform for growth. And we also took the decision early on that we wanted to be masters of our own destiny. So we've had plenty of opportunities along that journey to take in third-party investment, but we've managed not to equity investment anyway, because we felt it was important to implement a long-term vision. We didn't want that kind of monkey on your back of, okay, so when's the exit scenario? So what we're expecting now is over the next few years for the growth to accelerate quite quickly. So we're looking at our target sort of 20 million by FY23.
That's pretty impressive, Nick. So I think I heard a few things in there. I think I heard that you've diversified out as a way of building that platform for future growth and expanding gently at the moment. And I've certainly heard that diversification into sectors. So just a couple of questions, right? So what is it that you gained really from diversification, and how did you know which sectors to move into? How did you make those decisions?
So I think whenever you read any sort of business book and people tell you the story of their business, it always looks like it's perfectly laid out and it was all planned end to end, and it's never quite like that. So we knew our comfort zone was defence back in 2014, 2015. So you've got to stick with your knitting. So military vehicles was a kind of an obvious next step, and we've been involved in a couple of sort of projects around that space. So it was clear to us that that's the way that the market would go. The benefits were obvious, so that really was a kind of a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. And then with the ESS stuff, as I said at the start, we didn't know exactly where we were going to end up when we started down the innovation funding route. We just knew the batteries were going to be big, and actually we thought that residential batteries would be the way to go. And we thought that for a couple of reasons. We thought, based on how we wanted to run the business, the cost of capital or the cost of product development to build a residential battery would be much less than a larger battery, and also the working capital constraints as we scaled up would be lower. But once we understood the markets better, it was clear that from an economic payback, commercial and industrial batteries just make a lot more sense. So residential is something that's on the back burner. We'll come back and look at it at some point in the future when the market conditions look more favourable. And then
the business model bit in there, isn't there, around the residential batteries as well, that's developing.
And then the industrial OEM stuff, I kind of dressed that up as the third diversification pillar of our strategy. we stumbled across that initially. We stumbled across one opportunity, and then we thought, hang on a sec, if this customer's got that problem, then I'm sure there are plenty of others. And you look at the macroeconomic sort of changes, the labour cost in China and elsewhere in Asia is increasing, so that gap is closing. And when you factor in a kind of a service element, post delivery, then there's a number of OEMs in the UK that are in the same situation. So that there's definitely a market there.
So I guess from those collaboration projects, what do you think your major takeaway has been? That that opportunistic falling into with the OEMs. What's the big takeaway? Has it changed the way you look on collaborative projects at all? You talked about being master of your own destiny, for example, earlier. So,
well, organisations can be quite sort of insular, and one of the sometimes it's a challenge, and sometimes it's been a great benefit. The location of our business is 15 miles from John O'Groat, so collaboration projects were a great way to kind of build a network where that kind of, if you're based in Cambridge or London or Bristol or Edinburgh, people go out and they network, and it's easy. The collaboration projects kind of forced us to go elsewhere. People came to us, so we were able to build relationships and get over that kind of geographic barrier. And you also benefit from all the experience those other organisations had or have experienced. So rather than trying to learn everything yourself all the time, it's just it's a way to kind of accelerate your learning, particularly when you're trying to get into a new sector.
Yeah, that's really good. And actually, I think the audience is probably really keen to find out how you've stayed in the position that you are, not subject to external investment. So I'm going to ask you about your mix of financing, but I guess I'm going to ask you about your mix of finance in the context of being 15 miles from John O'Groats. And has that been a help or a hindrance, right? So yeah, talk us through your financing, Nick.
So in that context, it has definitely been a help. So when we started on the journey, we were able to access funding from Highlands and Islands Enterprise. So that's the regional development agency that looks after the north of Scotland, and they were fantastic in terms of grants for product development and capex and a few other areas. And I'm based in Cambridgeshire, and I've tried to do the same thing here with the business in Cambridgeshire. But there is no equivalent. There are no RDAs left in England. So they were, have been, fantastically supportive. And then Innovate UK as well, that's been great. But we've also taken on various forms of debt as well. So, invoice financing, asset financing for new equipment. And we've been working with one of the sort of new challenger banks, Secure Trust Bank, who, are much more kind of collaborative and flexible than some of the kind of traditional, high street banking models that people might have encountered. So, there's definitely a kind of a lesson there. The further you get away from London, the more options you get in terms of, support packages. So, as I'm sure in Wales, there's a supportive climate, and the same in Northern Ireland as well, and in some of the regions of England. So, yeah.
I'm really interested. I mean, it's great to hear as somebody who lives in between the two steelworks in South Wales, which is a bit of a hint to my background. But it's great to hear that actually that support from those regional funding agencies has given you that boost. What I'm really interested in is this bank and how they collaborate with you differently. I think you were talking about inventory loans as well, and that debt sort of approach, because from when I'm talking to our cohort companies, it always feels like angel investors and VCs and maybe into VCTs and other sort of institutions, but it's not really talking to me about some of that more pragmatic sort of ways to manage your business to grow in the way you guys have.
Yeah, and so when we funded the acquisition of Prima, that was a predominantly debt-based acquisition. So we were able to raise money against the inventory, against the invoices, against the assets. So in every situation is different. And early on in our journey with Denchi, we were, and it's much harder to do it this way as well. It's much more painful. So when you spent 24 months of constantly looking at a cash forecast week in, week out, and that cash forecast always says you're going to run out of money in 3 months. It's not for everyone, but it is worth it in the end. So early on in the journey, we were looking at one of these cash forecasts, and we were thinking, we're going to run out of money. Okay, it's time to sort of bite the bullet and take on an equity investor. But rather than just throw ourselves at the market, we spent some time with some professional advisors. So we worked with an accountancy firm in the southeast called Price Bailey, and we went through the numbers with them, and it was them that really put us onto Secure Trust Bank and said, look, there's a debt way to get out of this situation. If you've got a clear path to growth, a clear path to profitability, then debt is definitely an option. It's much more difficult if you're in a pure startup situation where you've got a sort of 3-year runway of cash burn. Then there probably aren't any debt devices out there for you. But if you're at that point of shipping product, you've got customers, you've got product, but you're trying to get over that kind of working capital lump, then my advice would be to find some good professional advisors, work it through with them first, and then when you've got a clear idea of what the options are, then start to engage with potential lenders.
I think I guess that's where you're now looking a little bit differently, because your platform now exists for a profitable business, and you're now looking really, I guess, to move towards more volume production. Is that right? Is it sort of the scale of what you're trying to, your next step?
Yeah.
That's, if just the thought process of going through that for me is really useful to understand. So I guess let's come back to the product again, because actually that's the other thing that I think is really key. And actually, how have you been getting some of these companies? I think you talked about Lemac and the oh God, I've lost the stair lift. Thank you.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
It'll come back to me. And the stair lift business. How did you approach them? What have you done? And have you learned anything from working with the OEMs in terms of how to get some of the larger UK businesses interested in what you're doing in Denchi?
Yeah, so the Lemac stair lift opportunity that came about through mutual connections, really. And again, it's one of the other nice things about being in one of the kind of regions of the UK, or the nations of the UK, I should say, is that there is a kind of community, there is a sort of network. So we were introduced to each other through a mutual connection. And what was great for us as a learning experience, working with that organisation, was that was our kind of first foray into, okay, we've got to really, really focus on cost now. So, cost is obviously important for all customers, but, in the defence and aerospace space, safety, reliability, they are bigger drivers. So, although we help them, we help educate them about some of the nuances of lithium ion and how that could, work better with their system. They really helped us focus in on cost, because although they needed to change their incumbent supplier, they weren't going to pay, twice the price. So we had some, interesting and in the end very helpful conversations with them.
So I guess, is that part of your strategy for growth then, that looking to further reduce costs? Is that something that you can see in your cross-sectorial strategy?
Absolutely. So, with the energy storage market, for example, that is very cost sensitive. But, I like the position that we got to, which was, we can do the safety stuff, we can do the high reliability stuff, we can design batteries that can be, submerged, shaken to death, high temperature cycles, etc., etc. And I think it's an easier development to then say, okay, how do we take the cost out, rather than starting with a low cost, not just product but culture of organisation, and then try and move up to the to the higher reliability levels. That's a much bigger challenge.
Okay, so I can see
the great thing, sorry, Jackie, the great thing about working in cost sensitive markets is that everybody is always telling you, what the cost should be, where you need to be. So there's no ambiguity about it.
No, that is true. That is very true. I can see Akhil has asked us a question. Just to remind everybody listening in, I think we've got about 155 people listening in, just to ask us questions. Okay, we'll get to them at the end. And Louise, who's behind the scenes, will make sure we stick to time. I guess I've got a question for you about, my job, right, in the Faraday Battery Challenge, and being part of the wider UK ecosystem. Has it helped you? Could we do some more stuff? If there's anyone listening in who's not part of it, how could they, how would they benefit, or how could they benefit from more of the same from Faraday, or more improved service from Faraday?
So honestly, I lose track of the amount of funding opportunities there are out there from Innovate UK. Every now and again, I get to go to a workshop, pre-lockdown, and every now and again, somebody sort of puts their hands up and kind of moans that the government's not doing enough to support this sector in this in the innovation landscape, and I find that really hard to believe. And also, people complain about how complex it is. Go back 15 years and do a technology strategy board application, handwritten on paper. I mean, you can't make it any easier. If you can't, do the application, then you don't deserve the funding. To be honest, I think the UK is swimming with innovation funding opportunities at the moment, and you see where the money goes, and if you're in industry, you might have a view as to how well that money has been dispersed. But at the end of the day, it's about backing a broad range of sort of businesses, and it's a bit like the VC model. There are going to be kind of failures. It's not all going to work out, and that's all fine.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so I guess we're getting to the sort of a point where I want to just talk to you a little bit more strategically. So if you're looking at the UK battery sector, do you see opportunities for onshoring? I can, for Lamach, you've sort of had a practical hands-on experience. Can you see other opportunities coming in the current sort of COVID-19 situation and in the economic place we find ourselves now? Can you see it working to our benefit as a country, as a nation?
Yes, definitely. So there was already, mood music all around the whole kind of, Brexit situation that, we need to do more in the UK. There's been a kind of a gradual increase in support for, manufacturing, and recognition by governments that it is an important element of the UK economy. And the biggest driver is going to be the economics. So labour prices are on the rise in Asia, and yes, people are finding other low cost countries to set up manufacturing, but it's all moving in the right direction for the UK. So I definitely expect us to win more of those opportunities over the next couple of years.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much from us. So what I'm hoping is we're going to have some more questions come in. We've got a couple in front of us now. So and I think we've got 180 people in the audience, Nick. So no pressure as we do this interactive bit. So I'm going to start with Rob Yates's question for you. I don't know if you can see that, Nick, but I can. And he's asking about any need for a new battery electrode that uses electrospun nanofiber mats to increase energy density and decrease the required charge time of the battery. So I guess that's cell chemistry, and that's not your core business, but interested really, I guess, to hear what you think the developments are going, the big developments that are going to be for your batteries as we move forward.
So, we keep a watching brief on new technologies, but for us, it always comes down to the same thing. Give us some cells, and we'll test them, and then when we see how they perform when they've been scaled up to cell level, then we'll let you know what we think. It's impossible to kind of keep up with all the developments at the materials level, and like you say, that's not our focus. But we're more than happy to test cells when they've reached that level of maturity.
So I guess for Rob, who asked that question, you might want to sort of touch back in with things like the Faraday Institution or the Faraday Battery Challenge. Watch out for any new competitions in the collaborative R&D space or in the university space, depending on where you're sat, because that might be a section where you could find some of those collaborators that will answer that question for you in as a commercial project that could, well, if you are in electric spun nanofiber mats, that could help you sort of answer that and actually potentially get you funding to take that forward to market.
It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it does sound, I mean, we're not the right people to answer that one specifically. And I guess that sort of fits a little bit with Akhil asking about what's our opinion on current Korean breakthrough in lithium-ion batteries. I don't know which one you're talking about, and I don't know if you know, Nick, but what I would say is we see these breakthroughs in the press a great deal, and a lot of them tend to be at very early stage research, and you're talking a huge journey to get them into commercial vehicles, and it is huge. And I think that's the piece around the Faraday Battery Challenge. You can see the scale of it, and you can see the challenges in it. What you can do though is you can talk in the UK to people. So what's lovely about the ecosystem that Nick and I sit in is, in 2 weeks' time, we've got a similar webinar to this one, and Paul Shearing from UCL is very likely to have a view on what electrospun nanofiber mats and the latest Korean breakthrough in lithium ion is happening. What I do see as well is there's another question in here from Jagdish, and that's around how does all that noise around batteries, I guess, all those technological advances, how do they create risks for investments in battery manufacturing? And Nick, I guess this comes back to your business model and how you've grown, and also possibly a little bit back to me, because I get investors asking me that sort of question. And I think from my perspective, being able to sort through the snake oil or the hype, as it were, on some of those new technologies, and put that into a context that will be a business return is really key. And so sometimes it's around demystifying battery technology, and I think that's what the UK can really do with the ecosystem we're trying to create in the Faraday Battery Challenge. Nick, from your perspective, when you're talking to investors, how do they talk to you about, well, surely solid state are going to be the future. How do you respond to an investor when they're asking you those sorts of questions?
We're very much the tortoise, not the hare. So when people are talking about the kind of next great breakthrough, I really struggle to get excited about it, because we just want to get involved when the cells have reached maturity. It's just not our game. Somebody will back the right technology, and they'll make an absolute sort of killing, and that's good luck to them, fantastic. But I don't have the blood pressure for that sort of business. But of course, we've got next door neighbours at our factory, and their model's a little bit different in that they're helping materials developers bridge that gap between, well, I've got some fantastic technology at half cell level, and they will work with them to help them scale it up to some sort of pilot production level to then be able to kind of validate that technology for a cell manufacturer. So there are other organisations in the UK that can help on that job.
And I guess the nice thing is who they are, right? I don't know if that's changed with the advent of the Faraday Battery Challenge for you, Nick. The ease of navigating some of those what's the word, information and misinformation, sort of blood pressure inducing sort of tidbits that you find and trip across in this area.
Well, that's the nice thing about the ecosystem. You can just phone somebody up or email somebody, and then quite quickly you've been connected to the person who's most knowledgeable around that particular point. So
yeah, and I think for those people listening, what I love about the structure of the Faraday Battery Challenge is when you're making cells at scale, that it's a pretty continuous process, right? You really don't want to disrupt it and run trials on new materials, but it's an ever-growing, ever-innovating, immature technology area, right? So you need to differentiate your cells, you need to differentiate your batteries, and yours is on the engineering of those batteries, Nick, but all that through. And so to put a 200,000 square foot facility that can prototype at full manufacturing rate in next to Coventry Airport, that for me is very exciting, because when I look at the new chemistries and I look about what the next generation is, for me some of the core value is in being able to run it at rate, that engineering, that manufacturing engineering challenge. And that's actually where I think of some of the really valuable IP is for the UK. And when I start talking to equipment manufacturers and testing specialists and companies that are looking at how you put recycling infrastructure into the UK, then you start to get to see just the breadth of how that IP can support UK growth in batteries, and just how beautifully Denchi Power and other companies just fit into that, and your growth plans really make sense. So I think we've got a few more questions. How are we planning to invest into battery technology for better performance? So I guess maybe Nick, how are you planning on your investments? Because obviously, whilst yours are designed for reliability, what's your sort of investment strategy into your future products?
So for us, it's about so we want to be involved in projects that have got a long manufacturing tail. So if you went back 6 or 7 years, most of our assembly process was fairly manual in terms of welding, soldering, etc. And we've been gradually bringing in some levels of automation. And when we look at our path for the next sort of 2 or 3 years, it's about investing in much higher and more expensive levels of automation to enable us to scale up.
So that's really interesting, and I guess that again fits with your theory about the UK government and the amount of support in this space. I have colleagues in a different challenge called Manufacturing Made Smarter, and they're looking at all the artificial intelligence and the digital twinning and all those digital and IoT and all those digital manufacturing elements that can support your growth, which I think is really interesting. I don't know if that was quite what Jagadesh actually wanted to answer. Hopefully, if you caught the presentation, earlier, you'll have seen how the innovation space in batteries is being funded in the UK and intends to go forward. I've got a question though. I think that's for Nick. But I'm going to answer it as well after you have. The question is, are you planning on investing in battery degradation measurement techniques, Nick?
So for our kind of traditional batteries, that's not something that we have needed to do. But for some of our energy storage products, where we're looking at a 10 to 15 year lifetime, we're building in extra levels of data capture to enable us to build much stronger analytic and predictive models, so we understand the performance and the degradation of those cells over that lifetime. So, before Denchi, I was involved in ABSL, and we sent batteries off on sort of 10, 15-year missions to Mars, the Moon, etc. So that kind of simulation analysis, backed up by correlated with test data, was really, really important. But we invested a huge amount of time and money building those models. So what's been interesting is we've kind of started to dip our toes back into this, sort of maybe 10 years later, is how much that space has moved on in terms of, simulation, the new kind of models and algorithms, the possibility of, some kind of low-level AI integration. So it's something we are going to do, but we're just at the start of that journey. But again, it's the perfect opportunity for, collaborative projects with academia.
Yeah, and I think that's one weird answer from a Faraday Battery Challenge point of view as well. So we have Professor Claire Gray leading somewhere around the £10 million mark on into battery degradation, and really understanding that cutting edge science and on actually what's happening as batteries degrade. So that's at university level. And I guess actually we're also doing things like modelling, and there's a lot of modelling projects looking at the predictability of batteries through their lifetime. So it depends on what degradation you're sort of talking about. So from the scientific principles of how batteries degrade, so that you can better solve degradation problems, all the way through how you predict it and how you manage it, and how you can respond to degradation in batteries. So that actually, for example, you might want to use end of life vehicle batteries in secondary life. If you look through the Faraday Battery Challenge, I can send panelists a summary brochure of all the projects that we have on. You can see the companies in the UK that are working in this space, even through to some of those testing solutions that can help you sort of identify what's going wrong with your battery. What I find really interesting is when it comes to vehicles, we have 110 years of internal combustion engine technology and development that we're sort of trying to catch up. So, Doan, I actually don't have the answer for you in terms of where we sit in terms of the battery R&D in the world rankings. What I do know is those 400 researchers in the Faraday Institution are world class. We have MOU signed with J. Caesar in the States, and we have plans afoot internationally to expand and develop that. So unfortunately, I don't have that exactly to hand, but yeah, worth investigating if that's the space you're interested in with the Faraday Institution via their website. Right, so I've got another one for you, Nick, a nice practical one. Do you see Denchi getting involved in mass market transport solutions, such as EVs, goods vehicles, and will that mean manufacturing further south in the UK? Can we tempt you away from Thursday?
So we expect to be involved in the periphery of automotive. So obviously we're already on military platforms, but things like rail, so we've already had a battery on a hydrogen fuel cell battery demo. If we look at kind of agricultural off-road vehicles, construction, so that kind of peripheral automotive where there's still a kind of requirement that leans more to the kind of high reliability end of the spectrum. So we don't see ourselves getting involved in kind of mainstream automotive. That's not our bag.
No, but it's really interesting from where I sit, because obviously I speak to Denchi and I speak to others. You see companies like Arrival just outside Oxford with last time I spoke to them, they're already employing sort of 600 people in light good vehicles, and a really nice modular approach and a very high-tech manufacturing approach to those. And so you can kind of see how these things are starting to expand. And I think one of the things we miss about, and you touched on really beautifully, was just how bespoke each application really is, and the space in the companies, the space in the companies, in the market for lots of different companies to really get in there, particularly on cross-sector applications. Faraday got born out of an automotive lens because we could see a cliff edge of air quality legislation in urban areas, combined with CO2 limits by 2030. And it's a long lifespan for vehicles before they pay back for volume automotive. So you sort of saw it start from a volume automotive life scale. We came and spoke to Denchi, who are obviously in military, because some of those commercialization routes are very different. So for Kevin's response, it may not be Denchi this time around. It may, if you speak to Nick very nicely and have a conversation with him afterwards. But we're seeing, definite expansion in all other applications.
I'm always interested in having a conversation.
Yeah. So I think we've gone through most of the questions and answers, the ones we could. So type fast if you've got another one for us. Otherwise, I think, Nick, I'm going to sort of start to wrap up our webinar today, because it's been a lot of fun. I think the last number of people that were watching us have this YouTube was about 206 people. Louise, have I? Oh, 236 people have been watching us live. Nick, that's quite a strange event for me in my life. My children are going to be very impressed that that many people were watching my YouTube live stream. It's been fantastic to talk to you. And I hope this is really a catalyst for those 236 people, for you to just come and ask us more questions, come and get more involved, and engage with us a bit deeper. Right, so I do have one. Somebody typed a very, very quick question. Considering the transport industry as one key customer, there was a time when fuel cell, hydrogen, etc., were competing with batteries for propulsion. Can we now say that battery has won that race? So I get asked this a lot, and the reality is a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle needs a battery on the whole, and actually we don't see them as competing, but actually synergistic. What I think you probably can say is for volume automotive, they needed to be able to place orders for architectures for big volume production vehicles. That really meant that you needed suppliers who were had the financial depth to be able to take on a full automotive billion-pound contract, so paying for any product failures, paying for any stoppage times, paying for any liabilities or insurance issues or whatever else. So you needed companies of the size and scale of Samsung, LG Chem, Toshiba, Cattle, all of those companies. So for volume automotive, they sort of got squeezed into that. And alongside it, I think they also worked out that for volume automotive, fuel cells were very complex. So we've seen some announcements recently from some of the European manufacturers in particular that they're pulling out of their hydrogen pre-series architectures. And that's just because of the complexity of it. But when I ask about buses, something that's in use 18 hours a day and doesn't really has seconds to charge, you can't really see a break-even point for batteries as easily as you probably can for hydrogen. That's not to say that there might not be solutions. So do I think we can say batteries have won? I think in the short term, you probably can. In the medium term, you'll start to electrify more and more and more vehicles and transport, and you'll see more hydrogen and fuel cell sort of options there. I think in the long term, we're just going to see a rainbow of different technologies, and they're as bespoke as they can be. Right. I am going to just switch to the final slide that you guys can see. So if you want a one-to-one call with me, You click on that link if you want a one-to-one call with Nick. Click on the other link on the right-hand side. If you want to read more about Denchi and Denchi's group and how they've sort of found their USP with Lamac and the stair lifts, there's links there. And do follow us on Twitter. And if you're interested, I have Nicoletta as well in the background, who is works for the KTN, and she's setting us set up a cross-sector special interest group. So that's for battery applications. So if you're interested in understanding how batteries could apply to aerospace, to rail, to marine, to all the other ones that Nick mentioned, like off-highway, niche vehicles, do get in touch with us too. So so that's where you are right now. And then the final slide is around the other 2 webinars that are coming. I'm hoping you guys have really enjoyed our time today. I've enjoyed speaking to Nick, but actually, if you really want to understand the in-depth engineering of a 200,000 square foot flexible gigafactory rate facility, then do log on the 21st of July at 11 a.m, so a bit earlier, to listen to Jeff Pratt. He's the MD of the UK BIC, and actually he is ex-Nissan battery plant. So he's used to and has set these things up before. So he's got a wealth of knowledge in that space. So if you're an equipment manufacturer, or if you're just really interested in taking your prototypes through to commercialization, tune in and listen to him. And then if you're into next generation and you want to know something a little bit more dramatic in the R&D, sort of in the early research sort of side of things, then Paul Shearing will be joining us on the 30th of July at 2 p.m. to talk about lithium sulfur and whether they really can be that game changer for aerospace, defense and automotive. So please sign up for those if you haven't done so already. And we'll also maybe, depending on the success of these and how well they go, we're looking at a further series of webinars in the autumn, so you might get me back live streaming again. But I think at that point, all that's left is for me to thank the team that have sat behind this. Louise Gold and Richard Robinson, I don't think, got a shout out. It's been a real passionate thing to do for the Faraday Battery Challenge team and our cohort like Nick to put this online and talk to people. But I think that's it from us, except to say thank you, Nick. Brilliant discussion, really interesting insight into how you've grown your business. And I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you.